early 20th century, there was a revolution against the Mexican dictator Porfirio Diaz. After the revolution, many Mexicans fled to the United States in search of a peaceful life. Little did they know that the Great Depression would hit the country, making their living conditions even worse than before.
Mis hermanos y yo, about 1.5 million Hispanics, have moved to the USA and looked for a better life. But then this depression hits.
Ay, Dios mío. I don't know if we have a better life. We have the lowest paying jobs with longer hours and poor working conditions.
The Great Depression caused Hispanics to lose their jobs, forcing them to relocate and create what became known as barrios.
It's such a shame I have to move to this barrio, but at least here I get to hang out with my muchachos.
I don't even know if it's worth it. We aren't even considered citizens. Our kids can't go to schools. Hospitals won't treat us. It's horrible.
But it didn't change. Local governments tried to force Mexican Americans out by making raids on their barrios.
Look out! Police!
Half a million Latinos moved back to Mexico during the Great Depression. This movement was called the Mexican Repatriation, and it caused a lot of pain to Mexican American families. Little has been written on the 15-year period from 1929 to 1944, when over 2 million people of Mexican descent, 1.2 million of whom who were born in the United States, were repatriated to Mexico.
As unemployment rose during the 1930s, anti-migration attitude arose within the government and the public from the belief that aliens were stealing American jobs. Officials believed that returning immigrants to their countries of origin would save the city money by reducing the number of needy families using up federal welfare funds and free up jobs for real Americans. Mexican Americans found themselves targeted for deportation, prohibited from employment, and labeled as unemployed indigents that burdened tax-paying citizens. One of the ironies of the Mexican repatriation was that many of those who were repatriated had been recruited to work in the United States when the Industrial Revolution hit full swing.
In September 1930, John R. Quinn, supervisor from the 4th District of Los Angeles, proposed legislation that would remove more than 2.5 million illegal aliens from the United States. We need their jobs for needy citizens, as said by C.P. Weisel, the spokesman for Los Angeles Citizens Committee for Coordination of Unemployment Relief. In April 1930, Senator Allen of Kansas introduced the Harris-Mexican Exclusion Bill, petitioning Congress to act in preventing Mexicans from obtaining places of employment which should otherwise be given to citizens of the United States.
On the 9th of December 1930, President Herbert Hoover named William N. Doak Secretary of Labor, which is the department responsible for immigration until the 1940s. Doak believed that deporting aliens occupying jobs desired by white Americans would solve the increasing unemployment problem. In an effort to remove these aliens, Doak ordered his agents to raid public and private places throughout the 1930s, especially 1931. Efforts to remove and restrict Mexican Americans from employment ironically left these men unable to sufficiently support themselves and ultimately in the need of public aid. It was these very immigrants, reliant on welfare, that were targeted by all levels of government for the burden they placed on the taxpayer.
The Civil Works Administration's restriction on only hiring American citizens had caused an increase of 30% in Mexican relief. Jefferson argued that the Mexican is refused the permission to work, even though he is willing to do so. The first massive raid occurred in El Monte on February 13, 1931. The El Monte raid was only the beginning of the raids targeting Mexicans for deportation, and only the beginning of Charles P. Weisel and Walter E. Carr's psychological campaign to force them out. By July, it was estimated that 40,000 Mexicans had left Southern California, and the Mexican Council estimated a continued immigration of 150 to 200 per week. James Batten, executive director of the Inter-American Foundation, created in 1929 to advance cultural relations between North and South America, cited that he viewed as a war on law-abiding aliens and called for a halt to the racist propaganda that had created an epidemic of hysteria against aliens. Though Biden was concerned largely with the loss of agricultural laborers, he did recognize the injustices being done to legal residents of the United States. In particular, Baden was appalled that many of the children leaving the country were American citizens by birth and forced to leave due to the anti-immigrant hysteria and climate of fear perpetuated by the deportation rate.
Two of the most important laws were the Texas Cotton Acreage Control Law of 1931 and 1932 and the Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1933. These two laws caused the displacement of large number of Mexicans in the early Depression. In response to both of these laws, landlords evicted thousands of Mexican tenant farmers and agricultural laborers who subsequently returned to Mexico. Similarly, federal legislation systematically excluded alien employment on federal work relief projects. In virtually all Texas communities, Mexicans were denied work because of these federal provisions. Mexican Americans who were unable to prove their citizenship were routinely denied employment. The denial of relief work on Civil Works administrations and Work Projects Administration projects was especially devastating to Mexicans because these projects provided a major source of employment for unskilled labor during the Depression. State requirements limited the employment of Mexicans on state-financed public works projects. Employment was denied to them in state highway construction and maintenance, in construction of state buildings, and even in teaching in public schools.
In the end, the continual raids begun in 1931 resulted in the deportation of thousands of Mexican immigrants, but the intimidation of legal residents and citizens resulted in the forced migration exponentially more. Though economic and social concerns were often cited to necessitate the deportations, the evidence overwhelmingly suggests that Mexicans were targeted for being Mexican. The best estimates conclude that over 2 million people were repatriated to Mexico during the Depression, with over 400,000 coming from California. In February 2005, California State Senator Joseph Dunn, D. Garden Grove, introduced Senate Bill 670 to apologize for the unconstitutional removal and forced migration of Californians during the Great Depression.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. We are here in company of Juana Gonzalez, a Mexican survivor of the Mexican repatriation raids during the 1930s, who will share with us a little bit of her story and her experience. So, Mrs. Gonzalez, tell us your perspective about what happened and what they did to you.
See, of course. Well, you see, the raids were pretty bad and pretty pointless as well. I think. These gringos, they try to kick us out from their country, and all we were doing is helping them.
Such a shame.
I know. It was horrible. I don't even know.
Now, expand a little more on what you mean about bad.
Well, bad is such a weak word to use. I think they were horrible. You should have seen how they treated us. They had no mercy whatsoever. As a matter of fact, half of us had no clue what was happening. We would just be there trying to get a job, and then these policemen would come and they would start running us off and shooting and doing all this horrible stuff to us.
That is horrible.
I know.
That really does sound like a bad experience. But thank you so much for sharing your story, Mrs. Gonzalez, and I really do hope this doesn't repeat itself in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us in BBC News.
You're insecure, don't know what